In his new book, Forward Notes on the Future of Democracy, 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang argues that America's current economic and political systems are outdated and offers suggestions on how to transform both to address 21st century challenges.
And again, I'm not after 3 parties. I think there should be 5 parties or 7 parties. And if we had that, then you'd have shifting coalitions, just like our founding fathers envisioned.
He's interviewed by California Representative Eric Swalwell, a Democrat. More after this.
Andrew Yang, former presidential candidate, former best-selling author, new book, Forward. Andrew, I had so much fun on the campaign trail with you. You were always someone who I thought was having the most amount of fun, and that reflected as you kept going up and up in the polls and were making debate stage after debate stage. And here you are now, post-presidential, post-New York City mayor's race with a new book. And I thought the book really reflected what I and other candidates saw from you on the trail, which was someone, who was having fun and shaking things up. And so, Andrew, in the spirit of shaking things up, in the last couple weeks, you have, been on a book tour, and recently you're promoting the book on the show of Tucker Carlson, and you felt some blowback from some of the people who supported you during the campaign. And I guess my first question to kick it off, would you go back on Tucker's show?
One of the things that also happened, Eric, and first, it's great to see you. Great to be here. For those of you watching, me and Eric hung out on the trail in Iowa in particular, because Eric had roots there. But that's what happens when you're a presidential candidate. You hang out with other presidential candidates, build relationships. And one of the things that I think Eric and I both felt out on the trail was that when you go to talk to people where they are, they're not as divided as our media environment might suggest. And I think C-SPAN's actually a perfect emblem of this, because C-SPAN is where people come together of different political alignments. And then when you get into the Fox universe and the MSNBC universe, it's like you're in separate worlds. So my going on different shows, Eric, is an attempt to try and bring people together and bring the world that people see on C-SPAN to folks where they are. And I know you and I shared that effort when we were out there with the people of Iowa and elsewhere.
What struck me, I guess, so would you go back on Tucker's show, Andrew?
Well, I've gotten a number of messages from supporters saying that their parents, for the first time, are open to me, because they saw one of them didn't even see me actually on Tucker's show. They just saw an ad, and that alone made me like a figure of interest. And I think that we're going to have to make moves like that if we're genuinely going to bring people of different alignments together.
Well, what struck me in the book was that on a number of different decisions, you kind of lay out your thinking, and you would do pro versus con analysis. I noticed as you pitched term limits, you kind of gave the readers an assessment of the pros of term limits, the cons of term limits. So when you were pitched, to go on the show, was there anyone in your universe, staff or family, that was saying not to go on the show? And if so, what was their biggest concern?
Well, Eric, I genuinely think, and I think you share this frustration, is that talking about the choices that someone like me makes vis-a-vis the media is exactly why our country is sinking into the dirt, really. What are the real problems we see? We're getting more and more polarized. Families can't get together for the holidays. Like no one feels like there's a way out. And then we get caught up in this media back and forth, and it's not helping anyone. So I just like to focus on the things that I think that people watching at home want to make progress on.
And so, Andrew, you in the title of the book is Forward, and that is also the name of the party that you have launched in the last few weeks. Why did you leave the Democratic Party?
Oh, man. And Eric, you and I consider you a friend. I think you and I are like-minded about a lot of things. We spoke to a bunch of young Democrat groups together and everything else. I left the Democratic Party because I think I can do more good launching the Forward Party, which is a popular movement to help bring the country together by making it so that our legislators answer to the reasonable among us and not the extremes on either side. And I'm someone who was a Democrat for 26 years, but I'm someone who just wants to help the country. and if I thought I could do more good this direction, which I did, then, it felt like the right thing to do. Obviously, I have many friends who are staunch Democrats, yourself among them. And hopefully this can be an emblem of the fact that being an American is bigger than which party you belong to.
And as I looked at the Forward Party, agenda or ideas that you laid out in the book, it ranges from ranked choice voting to having term limits, to promoting, capitalism. But would you say that the party is process focused and that you're seeking to shake up the political process, or is it going to be policy focused, like you ran your campaign on, universal basic income and other, ideas related to lifting up families?
It's so interesting you ask this, Eric, because at this point, the process and the policy are intertwined. Where if you're watching this at home, you are probably one of the 83% of Americans who lives in a district that's either safely Democratic or safely Republican. And so the legislators in your district answer not to 51% of the people who live in the district, but really the 10 to 20% on either side. So if you change the process, you're actually going to change the policy, which is what I'm driven by. I also want to suggest that at this point, independents outnumber Democrats or Republicans in any place in the country, and independents are often on the outside looking in. The duopoly is very, very poorly designed. It's leading us to greater and greater divisiveness and inflammation, and it's going to result eventually in political violence, which we're already seeing. So if you change the process, you're actually going to change the outcome very, very fundamentally. And so the two are very, very much linked together. We have to make our processes better and our incentives better if we're ever going to make progress on a lot of the things that you and I care about.
Now, Andrew, you wrote this book during your race for mayor, the summer of 2021. And then after the race, you lost in the primary, but the book came out shortly.
I do want to stop there, Eric. I wrote this book last year before I ran for mayor. It's physically impossible to write a book.
And Andrew, in the book, you talk about, obviously, the ideas behind the Forward Party, because I think the last chapter in the book is the Forward Party. And then, yes, you're right. You said that I wrote this book while I was deciding to run for mayor. Did you envision starting the Forward Party as you were the Democratic candidate for mayor, or did you make that decision after the primary?
Oh, it's a great question, Eric. So I wrote this book after the presidential campaign and concluded that divisiveness and polarization were going to destroy us, and that we needed a third way. We needed better mechanics, better incentives, more reasonableness, and we needed to reward leaders who were more reasonable, really. And so I drew this conclusion at the end of last year and said, okay, we need to do this. And because of the way I'm wired, it's like, well, saying we should do this without doing it yourself seems pretty lame. And then decided to run for mayor because I thought I could do a lot of good for New York City, where I live. And my plan A was I become the mayor of New York City, and then I launched the Forward Party as the mayor of New York City and say, look, check it out, a new way forward. And we're going to make things happen as like an illustration here in New York City. So that was plan A. And then I did not win. So now we're in the other plan, plan 2A, where I'm building the Forward Party as an independent.
And so, Andrew, I asked yesterday on my Twitter account, if my readers or followers had questions for you, and there were a lot of feedback and a lot of questions. But I'd say to rank choice vote this, the number one question was just concerns that, a criticism that you had run as a Democrat and perhaps had planned to leave the party but didn't tell anyone that. So what would you say to that criticism? And do you understand why some of the people that supported you would have been, concerned that you were representing that you were a Democrat while you knew that you would perhaps be leaving the party?
Well, I was straightforward about my policy stance. I think we had 77 pages of policy proposals. And so to me, that should be why you vote for someone and why you're excited about them or not, rather than what letter they decide to put next to their name. So as long as I was straightforward about my vision for the city, I genuinely don't think people would be very upset as long as I delivered on those things.
And Andrew, I know in the book you direct people in the afterword as to where they can go to join the Forward Party. I'll give you a chance again to promote that. But are you seeing people sign up, and are you seeing a transference of the people that supported you in the 2020 presidential campaign and then the New York mayor's race? Are they moving over now as you start to promote this across the country?
Oh, thank you. It is forwardparty.com. If you think that our politics right now are rewarding the extremes, please join us and we can become the unifying voice in the middle. One of the most interesting data points from the presidential race for me, Eric, was that 42% of the people that were supporting me as a Democrat were not sure they were going to support the Democratic nominee. And I'm so proud of the fact that I activated a lot of people that weren't traditionally into politics, a lot of independents, some Republicans. And so the people that are excited about the Forward Party run the gamut. And it is a lot of the same people that supported me in the past. And that makes me really proud. I hope this approach bears fruit and that people see that we do need more than two polls. In my mind, we should have more than three parties. If you look around the world, the UK has 5 parties. Sweden has 8 parties. This to me is just a more resilient, sustainable, vibrant system.
And Andrew, will this be a 50-state party, or are you going to focus on particular states where you think the reforms are needed the most?
Our first goal is to implement open primaries around the country. And it's easier in some states than others. So states that have ballot initiatives where we can ask the people to say, would you like an open primary? And right now, if you're watching this, again, there's a very, very significant chance that you're either in a minority party in a place where your vote really is excluded, or you're an independent. You might register with a party just to be able to participate. It shouldn't be that way, should it? I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution about political parties. And we can see the duopoly is not going so well. So we're going to go, Eric, to the states where we can have the biggest impact the soonest. And that does include places where a lot of people sign up at forwardparty.com.
Andrew, do you guys plan to endorse in the 2022 midterms?
Oh, yeah, we're excited to get to work in the 2022 midterms. And we'll be endorsing people who are running as Democrats in Democratic primaries, as Republicans in Republican primaries, as independents. There's one candidate, Evan McMullin, who's running as an independent in Utah for the Senate that we're excited about already. So we're going to be doing everything we can to have an impact in this 2022 cycle. So
there would be races where you would endorse the Democratic candidate who's running as a Democrat. 100%.
I mean, we have principles on the Forward Party website that if there's a Democrat who is for open primaries and fact-based governance and grace and tolerance, which I think is something America really badly needs right now, just knowing that you're not our enemy. No American should be our enemy, regardless of your political beliefs. If there are Democrats or Republicans or independents who subscribe to these things, then we'd love to support them.
And are you worried that you could perhaps endorse in a congressional race where you have kind of a pro-insurrectionist Republican, a Democrat running, and then an independent that you endorse? And we saw in 2020 that these races were decided by just a few thousand votes either way, that you could actually have the reverse effect of seeing the pro-insurrectionist Republican win.
Eric, this is one reason why we need to have a process change as quickly as possible. And so what you're describing is the spoiler effect, which is if you come in as an independent entrant, then you're going to mess things up for one party or the other. And this has been used as a bludgeon on any third party, regardless of libertarian, green, like whoever it is. It's like you're going to mess things up for someone. And so if that's your perspective, then you should just look up and say, why don't we adopt a more modern voting process like ranked choice voting? And then you can rank whoever you want first, whoever you want second, and your preferences then get expressed and there's no more spoiler effect.
And so Andrew, I think that's a great point, Andrew.
Let's get there. Sorry?
That's a great point. And so do you think it would be more constructive to first put in place ranked choice voting before you're putting in place endorsements in races where you don't have ranked choice voting, where you could see the baby thrown out with the bathwater?
Well, again, number one, Eric, in a lot of these cases, we might be endorsing in a primary. But we are agitating for ranked choice voting. And I think that there is a need to get it in place as quickly as possible. It's number one on our list.
You know, Andrew, I worked, you probably don't know this, but I worked for the Center for Voting and Democracy, which is now called Fair Vote, when I was in college. And I advocated.
Good for you. I just joined the board of Fair Votes Action Network. So,
great.
Yeah,
great. It's a great organization. They came out of the Bush v. Gore race where, Nader was, accused of being the spoiler, and they argued that if you had ranked choice voting, Al Gore would be president. And I worked to implement that at my college, the University of Maryland, and many other colleges for their student body elections. But we saw in New York with the ranked choice voting that it took a long time for the winner to be clear. So how can we make sure that you have a voting system like ranked choice voting that is more democratic, but not that it takes so long that people look at the system and blame the system for the delay?
Check it out. I lost that race, and I'm still here strongly advocating ranked choice voting. So it must be good if a guy who didn't win with it is super into it. But 95% of New Yorkers found ranked choice voting easy to use, and 77% want to do it again, which is near unanimity. You're right, Eric, that the New York City Board of Elections is not exactly known for its, stellar punctuality and other things. But the process is extraordinarily powerful and popular. And the fact that a bureaucracy, wasn't as on the ball as it should be, we should just make sure that that's better for the next time.
So last question on the Forward Party. No third party has really survived in the United States for well over 100 years. So if Forward Party survives, why will that be the case? And if it doesn't survive, why will that be the case?
If the Forward Party thrives, it's going to be because millions of Americans stand up and say, wait a minute, even if I like one party more than the other, this duopoly dynamic is literally tearing our country apart. Political stress is at record levels. We are inching towards violence and ruin. And a lot of people watching this can feel that. And so if the Forward Party thrives, it's because enough of us stood up and said, we have to actually make this democracy more genuinely capital D democratic, allow different points of view to emerge, have open primaries. And again, I'm not after 3 parties. I think there should be 5 parties or 7 parties. And if we had that, then you'd have shifting coalitions, just like our founding fathers envisioned. Our founding fathers, if they woke up today, they would be shocked and horrified by the fact that we have these 2 parties that are just going to clash until we're all in a country that we're not going to be able to recognize and we're not going to be excited to pass on to our kids. If the Forward Party dies, it's going to be because the dynamics did not change. And that even though 62% of Americans now want a third party and think that both parties are out of touch, that the duopoly managed to keep the mechanics the same to suppress the will of the American people to our collective detriment, really, to our collective ruin eventually.
Andrew, should Americans be able to vote online?
Eventually, we should be able to vote online. I mean, we manage a lot of our other affairs online. Is the technology ready for prime time at that scale? No, it's not. If we were to run pilots, would we want to have redundancy, including paper? Yes, we would. But we should try and make it a little bit easier to vote, shouldn't we? Because, no, it's 2021. And if we made it easier, I think you'd see more people voting.
I agree. And, I take a lot of blowback for this. And my position is...
That's why you and I get along, Eric. We're the same generation. We're like pushing things along. And one thing I do want to point out, and I know a lot of C-SPAN, actually, I don't know what the demographics are of C-SPAN viewers, but I think it's a problem that our leadership in this country has been at it for 20, 30, 35 years, and they don't understand technology the way they should. I think that we should have term limits in this country for this reason. 3/4 of Americans agree with that. I bet Eric, he's a cool member of Congress. He probably agrees with it.
Well, I think as someone who ran against a 40-year incumbent, it was actually the open primary in California in the top 2 system and independent redistricting. I saw good government as the actual term limit because it gave a guy like me a shot to win. And I think getting rid of dirty money and dirty maps, that can also be the quote-unquote term limit. But on online voting, Andrew, it's actually being done right now. West Virginia has done online voting. Utah has as well. And I'm with you in that if we should at least try. And if we fail, fine. But to not try on a mass scale, I think, really is failing disenfranchised voters who would have more access. I want to go back to the 2020 election.
We're doing it for U.S. military personnel
right
now who are in their district. They're voting online. It's working.
They are. So, Andrew, you and I first met on the 2020 trail. Neither of us emerged. You went a lot farther than I did. But how would you rate the job that President Joe Biden is doing so far here about 10 months in?
One of the things I believe is happening, Eric, is that our political figures are, at this point, both taking credit for and taking blame for things that may or may not be under their control. You know what I mean? So you're asking about how Joe's administration is doing. I think it's very easy for us to look at it and make a judgment, positively or negatively. But a lot of it, to me, is that we are passing along to our leaders some bureaucracies and organizations that aren't able to deliver at a high level. We have a culture now that is polarizing us and making it so that personal attacks are much more popular than reason and giving someone the benefit of the doubt. I think Joe and his team are dealing with a very, very tough situation. Let's put it that way.
So Joe Biden calls you up. He says, Andrew, I spent a lot of time on the debate stage with you. I'd like your support for 2024. What do you say?
Well, right now I'd say it's 2021. I mean,
so you're not ready to endorse Joe Biden for 2024.
We don't even know what the landscape looks like. We don't, it's like who the heck knows what's going on? Right now, I think our focus should be on trying to get open primaries and independent candidates across the finish line in 2022.
Will you be on the ballot in 2024 as a Forward Party candidate?
Again, my focus is solely on 2022. A lot of people, when they hear third party, they fast forward straight to presidential and try and draw on past experiences. That's not where my attention is at all.
So, Andrew, as I said, I noticed you were just one of the most normal guys that I encountered, men and women that I encountered
You too,
on the
Eric.
trail.
You too.
But one of my favorite questions that I ask my interns on their last day of the job in the office is, what was the best day, what was the worst day, and what was the most embarrassing moment? We call it highs, lows, and uh-ohs. So for the 2020 election, what was your best day, your worst day, and your most embarrassing moment?
Well, the best moment, it strikes me as just, it just reminded me of some of the rallies we had, whether it was in New Hampshire or Los Angeles or Iowa or wherever it was, seeing so many people come together that start to believe in you and your vision. In my case, it was centered on universal basic income and the fact that we really can provide more for people. We put $4 trillion to work in Wall Street. The CARES Act was enough for $1,000 per American for 6 months each. We could have done it. We can do it. So those were the best days when people came together. And it's funny, Eric, because you and I were on the trail together. I vividly remember being the candidate that no one wanted to talk to. You and I might get big-footed because Elizabeth Warren or someone else walked in the room. So I vividly remember being that candidate. And then I remember having this energy around me. And I'm just so grateful to everyone who supported me. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. So that was the best. The worst day... The thing that comes to mind for me was after the first presidential debate, people didn't feel like I got a lot of airtime, and I felt like I'd let people down. And so there was a real sense of, self-consciousness.
In the book, you said it was about 2.5 minutes is what you calculated.
Oh, yeah, no, I had to look it up. And over time, I began to realize that, maybe there were some other forces at play, but not knowing anything, not having a basis for comparison, that was a very difficult period for me. What was the last one was most embarrassing?
Most embarrassing. What was the most Veep-like moment on the trail?
The most embarrassing for me there was a period when I was getting a lot of attention for dancing and crowd surfing. And, I think I put whipped cream, a supporter just asked me to give him whipped cream. And I did. That became a thing for days. And I was like, oh my gosh, as again, like a fairly normal person, as you suggest, Eric, you just sort of try and respond to the person in front of you. And then sometimes it kind of takes off.
Andrew, you also had two young boys while you were out on the trail, and one of your sons has autism. Can you talk about the challenges that your supporters and the C-SPAN viewers probably did not see as you tried to be a presidential candidate, but also a good father and a good husband?
And you and I bonded over this, Eric. Running for president is very, very difficult. And I think that a lot of people get beaten up in ways that really is unfair. And I guess you and I can relate to this, Eric, because a lot of the time you're traveling for hours or a day to a very poorly attended event, you constantly have to be can do. In the meantime, though, I was a dad and had kids at home, one of whom has special needs. And sometimes, there's a lot to handle. I mean, we're still human beings. And I don't think people really account for that. I mean, who would spend time away from their families to try and do something positive in the country like Eric did? Or, it's either someone who's a really good person like Eric is, who wanted to do something very positive for the country, or they're the type of people that just don't like their families and the rest of it, which I'm happy to say, is not the norm, even on the political trail. So please do give people who run for office like a moment and think, okay, is this person sincere? Are they really trying? Because I think a lot of people don't take that into account, that we are human beings, we have families, we miss them.
And your wife also bravely came forward with her own story of sexual abuse from someone who was her doctor, I think, for your first son. And, it's awful for any sexual abuse victim, to have to come forward, but it's even more magnified and amplified when she's a part of a family that's in the public eye. Can you just talk about, what decisions were made before, she came forward? And again, just touching on the pressures that you as a candidate and she as a supporter of a candidate would have to think about that others would not.
Thank you, Eric. I'm so proud of Evelyn and the outpouring of support that she received after she came forward with her story about being sexually assaulted by her physician. So she was sexually assaulted when she was pregnant with our older son, our first child. And she did not tell me for years afterwards, kept it to herself. And then when she did tell me, it was obviously heartbreaking and infuriating, and made me feel like a failure as a partner. It was a very emotional time for the family. But of course, I was the only one who knew. I mean, our friends and family didn't know. And then when she was deciding whether to share it with the world, I was trying to be as supportive as I could be, while just supporting her. Just say, look, whatever you want to do, I am 100% behind you and with you. If you want to, frankly, do what I think like the normal thing to do would be just to not talk about it, I'll support you. And if you do want to talk about it, I would love to. There was part of me, Eric, I had to say, I was like kind of rooting for her to share her story because I thought it was so important, but I never wanted to say that ever, because the last thing you want to do is be someone who is somehow pushing your partner to do something so personal. And then when she did share the story, I was deluged with supportive messages from friends and family of mine who were like, I'm so sorry, I never knew. And then that really made me very emotional, because you realize that all of a sudden, all these people that know you know that your family has gone through this. But when Evelyn and I were out on the trail in the days to come, she would see so many women who'd come to her with tears in their eyes. And it felt cathartic for so many people. And then 40 other women plus came forward about the same doctor, and he was arrested on federal charges. So I just think my wife's a hero.
How is Evelyn doing now?
She's great. I mean, she's a rock and a rock star for the family. Like, our kids are happy and healthy. I just am indebted to her every single day. Anytime someone thanks me, which happens on occasion, I just say, thank my wife, because she's the real force behind everything.
And so, Andrew, you've talked about having a son with special needs, a wife who was a sexual assault victim, and you are not someone who's helpless. You're in the public realm. You've run for office. What can you do with these, unique experiences, to make a difference on those issues?
I'm going to do everything I can to help. Certainly, to me, being special needs is the new normal. I know so many families who are going through that. Unfortunately, being a victim of sexual assault is all too commonplace. My wife wrote a book trying to teach kids about sexual assault. It's a kid's book about sexual assault is the name of it. And so I'm so proud of her on that level. For me, Eric, the best thing I can do is try and bring our country together, because polarization is tearing us apart. Politics is making people feel like their own countrymen and fellow Americans are their enemy. And I want to try and heal that divide. If I can do that, then we'll make progress on these other problems as well.
Andrew Yang, his new party is Forward. It's also the name of his new book, a big test to see if it can succeed, the party that is, in the upcoming midterm elections.
Everyone is welcome. Democrats, independents, Republicans.
But Andrew, you've already succeeded. You're a New York Times bestselling author. So the book is Forward, Notes on the Future of Democracy. And I encourage everyone to read it and to follow Andrew on Twitter and ask him the tough questions as well, and have that open dialogue. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you, my friend Eric Swalwell, future of America.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks, man. Great seeing you.
C-SPAN has a new podcast about books. Each episode delves into news about the nonfiction book publishing industry with publishing experts and insiders. You'll also hear reports on the latest nonfiction bestsellers, trends, and book reviews about books. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.